At a family dinner, my sister-in-law slapped my 10-year-old son so hard he fell off his chair. Her mother smirked and said, "That's what brats deserve." Everyone just sat there. I said nothing. I just dialed one number. 10 minutes later, the crack of palm against cheek echoed through the dining room before I could process what had happened. My son Oliver hit the hardwood floor, his chair clattering sideways, his glass of lemonade shattering against the table leg. For a fraction of a second, the only sound was the liquid pooling beneath the wreckage of what had been, moments ago, a perfectly normal Sunday dinner at the Holloway family estate. Then came the smirk. Patricia Holloway, my mother-in-law's aunt, grandmother to my sister-in-law Vanessa, leaned back in her chair with an expression I will never forget. Satisfaction. Pure, undiluted satisfaction spreading across her weathered features like she had just watched someone swat a particularly annoying fly. "That's what brats deserve," she said. Oliver looked up at me from the floor, his left cheek already flaming red, his eyes wet with shock rather than tears. He was trying so hard not to cry. My beautiful boy, who had done nothing, absolutely nothing, except accidentally bump Vanessa's elbow while reaching for the bread basket. A 10-year-old's momentary clumsiness. A child's innocent error at a table surrounded by adults who were supposed to love him. I scanned the table methodically, memorizing each face, cataloging each reaction. My husband Derek sat frozen, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, his expression cycling through surprise and something that looked disturbingly like resignation. My mother-in-law Judith pressed her napkin to her lips as though the real offense here was the disruption to her carefully planned meal, her eyes darting nervously between her sister and me. My father-in-law Richard studied his plate like it contained the secrets of the universe, his shoulders hunched in the posture of a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of strategic invisibility. Vanessa herself had the audacity to look annoyed, rubbing her elbow as though she were the injured party, her perfectly manicured nails catching the light from the chandelier above. And my husband of 12 years. The man who had promised, in vows exchanged under an arbor of white roses, to protect our family. The man who had held Oliver as a newborn and sworn he would give this child everything. He said nothing. He simply sat there, paralyzed by his own cowardice, waiting for someone else to decide how this moment would resolve. Something shifted inside me. It wasn't rage, exactly. Rage is hot and immediate and burns itself out, leaving behind ash and regret. This was colder. This was sharper. This was the moment when every small slight, every whispered criticism, every holiday spent walking on eggshells around these people crystallized into absolute clarity. The fog of 12 years lifted, and I could finally see the landscape I had been stumbling through. I rose from my chair slowly, my napkin falling to the seat behind me. I walked around the table to where Oliver still sat on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass and spilled lemonade, and I helped him to his feet. My movements were calm, deliberate, unhurried. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting for the explosion, bracing for the scene that would let them dismiss me as hysterical, emotional, overreacting. I didn't give them one. Instead, I reached into my purse, still hanging on the back of my chair where I always kept it, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I had memorized 18 months ago for exactly this purpose. "This is Nina Castellano," I said quietly, my voice steady as stone. "I need you at the Holloway residence. 4847 Crescent Oak Drive. It's happening. Come now." I ended the call and returned my phone to my purse with the same measured precision. Then I knelt beside my son, gently examined his cheek, already beginning to swell, and kissed his forehead. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice small and uncertain. "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything is going to be okay now." The room remained suspended in uncomfortable silence. Vanessa shifted in her seat, the leather creaking beneath her. Patricia took a pointed sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving my face, as if daring me to make a scene. Judith cleared her throat in that particular way she had perfected over decades of smoothing over family conflicts. "Nina, really, there's no need to be dramatic about a minor." "I'm not being dramatic," I said pleasantly, helping Oliver to a chair at the far end of the table, away from Vanessa and Patricia. "I'm waiting." "Waiting for what?" Derek finally spoke, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when he thought I was overreacting. I had heard that tone so many times over the years. When his mother criticized my cooking. When his sister made snide remarks about my career. When his family consistently treated my son, their own flesh and blood, their grandson and nephew, as an inconvenience to be tolerated rather than a child to be cherished. "You'll see." The next 8 minutes stretched into eternity. Richard attempted to restart conversation about the upcoming election, stumbling over his words, but they fell flat against the tension filling the room. Vanessa pulled out her phone and began scrolling with theatrical disinterest, though I noticed her hands weren't quite steady. Patricia refilled her wine glass with the deliberate casualness of someone who refused to be intimidated. Judith stood and began collecting plates with tight, controlled movements, her smile fixed in place like a mask. Derek approached me near the doorway where I had positioned myself and Oliver, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Nina, whatever this is, can we please handle it privately? You're making everyone uncomfortable." I looked at my husband, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in years. The weak chin he tried to hide with a carefully groomed beard. The eyes that slid away from conflict like water off glass. The slight hunch in his shoulders that appeared whenever his family was involved, the posture of a boy who had learned early that survival meant never challenging the hierarchy. "Your sister struck our child hard enough to knock him from his chair," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your aunt called him a brat and smirked while he lay on the floor. And you're concerned about making people uncomfortable." "She barely touched him, Nina. Oliver's fine. Aren't you, buddy?" He directed this last question at our son with a desperate sort of cheerfulness. Oliver, still holding his swelling cheek, said nothing. He just looked at his father with an expression that broke my heart, the resignation of a child who had learned that certain people would never protect him. The doorbell rang. I walked through the foyer, my heels clicking against the marble that Judith was so proud of, and opened the front door. Monica Chen stood on the doorstep, dressed in her usual sharp blazer, her leather briefcase in hand. Behind her stood a uniformed police officer, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense set to her jaw, and another woman in business casual attire holding a tablet. "Mrs. Castellano." Monica nodded briskly, her dark eyes taking in my expression with the shrewd assessment I had come to rely on. "You said it was happening." "It did. Please come in." The procession entering the Holloway family dining room created an immediate shift in atmosphere. Richard stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor with an agonizing screech. Judith's face went pale beneath her careful makeup. Vanessa finally put down her phone, her expression cycling through confusion, annoyance, and the first flickers of genuine alarm. "What is this?" Patricia demanded, her wine glass still clutched in her hand. "Who are these people?" "This is a private residence. This is Monica Chen," I said. "She's been my attorney for 15 years. This is Officer Reyes from the Meadowbrook Police Department. And this is Sandra Delgado from Child Protective Services. They're here because my son was just assaulted at this table, and I'm done pretending this family's behavior is acceptable." The color drained from Derek's face. "Nina, what are you doing?" "I'm protecting my son. Something you've consistently failed to do." Monica stepped forward, her heels clicking against the hardwood with authority. "I understand there was an incident involving a minor here this evening. Mrs. Castellano, can you walk me through exactly what happened?" I recounted the events clearly and without embellishment, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Oliver's accidental bump while reaching for bread. Vanessa's immediate and violent response, an open-handed slap delivered with enough force to knock a 40-pound child from his chair. The fall. The shattered glass. Patricia's smirk and her comment about what brats deserve. The family's complete failure to intervene, to comfort Oliver, or even to acknowledge that something wrong had occurred. "That's ridiculous," Vanessa sputtered, rising from her chair with indignation practically radiating from her designer dress. "I didn't assault anyone. The kid knocked my arm and spilled my drink on my dress. This is a $300 dress I bought for the spring gala. I gave him a little tap to teach him to watch where he's going. It's called discipline." Officer Reyes turned to Oliver, her voice gentle. "Son, can you show me your face? I need to see the injury." Oliver stepped forward hesitantly, glancing at me for reassurance. I nodded. Even under the chandelier's soft lighting, designed to flatter Judith's dinner parties, the handprint was visible. Red. Defined. Undeniable. The outline of Vanessa's palm and fingers was already darkening into what would become an impressive bruise. Officer Reyes photographed the injury with her phone while Sandra Delgado made notes on her tablet. "Mrs. Holloway," Sandra said, addressing Vanessa, "striking a child with enough force to knock them from a chair and leave visible marks goes well beyond a corrective tap. I'm going to need formal statements from everyone present." "This is outrageous." Richard finally found his voice, drawing himself up to his full height, a posture he usually reserved for business negotiations. "Nina, call off your people. We can discuss this as a family." There's no need to involve outside authorities in a minor disagreement. We are not a family, I said quietly. A family protects its children. A family doesn't sit silently while a 10-year-old is assaulted at the dinner table. A family doesn't dismiss abuse as discipline because acknowledging it would be socially inconvenient for the country club set. Monica opened her briefcase on the sideboard, producing a folder of documents she had prepared months ago. Officer Reyes, based on the visible injury and witness testimony, I believe we have grounds for a formal assault charge against Vanessa Holloway. Additionally, Patricia Holloway's comments, celebrating violence against a child, could be relevant to establishing a pattern of behavior. I'd like to file a report this evening. You can't be serious? Vanessa's voice had climbed to a near shriek, her carefully cultivated poise cracking like ice under pressure. I'm a respected member of this community. I chair the Junior League Charity Committee. I organized the hospital wing fundraiser that raised $300,000. You want to arrest me over a little slap? I want consequences, I said quietly. Something this family has never experienced. The next 2 hours were chaos contained within the elegant walls of the Holloway dining room. Officer Reyes took statements from each person present, her pen scratching steadily against her notepad. Richard's statement was a masterpiece of obfuscation. He hadn't seen clearly what happened, he couldn't be certain, perhaps Oliver had provoked the response, children could be dramatic. Judith's was similar, peppered with comments about how Vanessa had always been high-strung, how family matters should stay within the family, how surely this could all be sorted out without involving the authorities. Vanessa's statement was defensive and increasingly hostile. She maintained that Oliver had deliberately bumped her, that the slap was reflexive, that children needed firm boundaries in an age when parents had become too permissive. Patricia backed her up, adding commentary about how modern children were coddled and disrespectful and how her generation had been raised with proper discipline. Sandra Delgado interviewed Oliver privately in the living room, with my permission and presence. My son's voice was quiet but steady as he described what had happened. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. It's not the first time Aunt Vanessa has hit me, he said. I went very still. Sandra's pen paused mid-word. Can you tell me about the other times, Oliver? He picked at the hem of his shirt, not meeting anyone's eyes. She's grabbed my arm really hard before. A couple of times at Grandma's house when Mom wasn't in the room. Once she pulled my hair because I was talking too loud during her phone call. It hurt a lot. I lost some hair. Did you tell anyone about these incidents? I told Dad. Oliver's voice dropped even lower. He told me not to make a big deal out of it. He said Aunt Vanessa just has a short temper and I need to stay out of her way. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the arm of my chair and forced myself to breathe through the rage threatening to consume me. My husband knew. My husband knew, and he had told our son to stay quiet. Sandra made careful notes, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes sharp with understanding. Thank you for telling me, Oliver. You were very brave. None of this is your fault. Do you understand that? He nodded slowly, then looked at me. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. I pulled him into my arms. You're not in trouble. You're the bravest person in this house. By 10 o'clock, the official processes were complete. Vanessa had been formally cited for assault of a minor, a misdemeanor charge that carried potential fines and, more importantly, a permanent mark on her record. She would be released pending a court date, but the booking process and fingerprinting would need to be completed at the station. Patricia was issued a formal warning regarding her statements. Sandra Delgado had opened an investigation file on the Holloway family and scheduled a follow-up visit for the next week. She handed me her card with a look that conveyed volumes. She had seen this pattern before and she would be thorough. Derek cornered me in the foyer as I gathered Oliver's jacket and my purse, his face a mask of barely contained fury. You've destroyed this family, he hissed, keeping his voice low so the lingering authorities wouldn't hear. Everything my parents built. Everything Vanessa has worked for. Gone, because you couldn't let one little incident go. I looked at him, at the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, the man I had believed would always stand beside me, and felt something fundamental shift and click into place. No, I replied. I protected mine. We drove home in silence, Oliver falling asleep in the back seat within minutes, exhausted from the evening's trauma. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind already moving toward the next phase of a plan I had begun constructing 18 months earlier. Because what the Holloways didn't know, what Derek didn't know, was that tonight had not been a spontaneous response. It had been a culmination. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Update 1. 2 weeks later, the fallout from that Sunday dinner detonated across the Holloway family like a bomb with a delayed fuse, each day bringing new shrapnel. First came the phone calls. Judith left 17 voicemails in the first 3 days, each one escalating from confused hurt to righteous indignation to outright threats of legal action for defamation. Richard sent a single text message: "You've gone too far this time. There will be consequences." Vanessa's husband Paul called Derek at work to demand he get your wife under control before she destroys everyone's reputation. The Meadowbrook social circle, that carefully cultivated ecosystem of charity galas and country club dinners, began to buzz with gossip. The Holloways had worked for generations to build their standing, and now it was crumbling because, as Judith put it in one particularly memorable voicemail, your wife couldn't handle normal family discipline like a reasonable adult. Derek, for his part, had moved into the guest bedroom the night after the incident. He wasn't speaking to me except in clipped, functional sentences about household logistics. "Where's Oliver's permission slip for the field trip? The plumber is coming Tuesday about the bathroom leak. I'll be late Thursday, don't wait up for dinner." I let him sulk. I had more important things to focus on. The CPS investigation had revealed something I hadn't anticipated. During Sandra Delgado's follow-up interview with Oliver, conducted at our home in a comfortable environment, he had disclosed additional incidents I knew nothing about. My son, it turned out, had been carrying secrets to protect me from worry. This wasn't the first time Vanessa had put her hands on him. There had been arm grabs hard enough to leave bruises that he attributed to playground accidents. Shoves that sent him stumbling. Once, at a family barbecue 2 summers ago, she had pulled his hair so hard he lost a small clump near his temple. He had told me a branch had caught it while he was climbing a tree. And the worst part, he had told Derek about all of it. Every incident, every bruise, every moment of fear. Derek had told him not to make a big deal out of it. Derek had told him that Vanessa was just stressed, that children needed to learn to give adults space, that tattling would only make things worse for everyone. My husband had known. My husband had instructed our son to suffer in silence. When Sandra shared this information with me, her expression carefully professional but her eyes full of compassion, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom. I gripped the sink until my knuckles turned white and counted my breaths until the urge to scream subsided. That evening, after Oliver was safely in bed with his favorite book and his nightlight glowing softly, I confronted Derek. He was in the living room, laptop open, pretending to work. I stood in the doorway until he acknowledged my presence. "You knew Vanessa was hurting him." He didn't look up from his screen. "She wasn't hurting him. She was being firm. Kids need boundaries, Nina. Oliver's always been too sensitive, and you've made it worse by coddling him. Pulling a child's hair hard enough to remove a clump is abuse, Derek. Grabbing him hard enough to leave marks is abuse. And you told him to keep it to himself. You taught our son that his pain didn't matter. I taught him not to be a tattletale. There's a difference." He finally met my eyes, his expression a mixture of defensiveness and something that might have been shame, quickly buried. "My family has their ways. I survived it. Oliver would have too, if you hadn't turned this into a federal case." I stared at the man I had married. The man I had shared a bed with for over a decade. The man who had fathered my child and then systematically taught that child that his safety was less important than family harmony. "I want a divorce." He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You're being hysterical. This whole thing has gotten completely out of control, and you're threatening divorce? Sleep on it, Nina. You'll feel different in the morning." "I'm not being hysterical. I'm being clear. I'll have Monica draw up the papers. You can fight it if you want, but I think you'll find that a documented history of enabling your sister's abuse of your child will not play well in family court." The color that flooded Derek's face was deeply satisfying. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't blow up our whole life over some family disagreements." "Derek." I sat down across from him, folding my hands on the coffee table with deliberate calm. "I have 18 months of documentation. Journal entries dated and detailed. Photographs of bruises Oliver explained away as accidents, with timestamps proving they occurred after family gatherings. Text messages where your mother admits Vanessa has a temper problem and suggests we simply avoid triggering her. I have recorded phone calls, legal in this state with single-party consent, where your sister calls Oliver names I won't repeat in this house." His jaw worked silently, the reality of his situation beginning to dawn. "I have a CPS investigation that's about to uncover years of systematic mistreatment. I have a son who finally feels safe enough to tell the truth. And I have Monica Chen, who has successfully handled 37 custody cases in this county with a 94% success rate for her clients. You planned this. His voice was barely a whisper. This whole thing. The attorney already briefed, the police officer, the CPS worker arriving within 10 minutes. You planned it. I prepared for it. There's a difference. I hoped I would never need it. I hoped your family would change. I hoped you would choose us over them. But hope isn't a strategy, Derek. Not when my child's safety is at stake. He slammed his laptop shut with enough force to crack the hinge. I'll fight you. I'll get the best lawyers in the state. My family has resources you can't begin to imagine. Your family has resources, I agreed. Your family also has a newly opened assault case, a pending CPS investigation, and a very public scandal that's already making its way through the Meadowbrook gossip circuit. How much of those resources do you think they'll want to spend defending you in a custody battle that makes them look even worse? How eager will your mother be to testify when she might have to answer questions under oath about what she knew and when? The silence stretched between us like a chasm widening with every breath. I loved you, he said finally, his voice cracking. I actually loved you. I know. I stood up. And I love the man I thought you were. Turns out neither of us knew who we were married to. I went upstairs to check on Oliver. He was still awake, reading with a flashlight under the covers, a habit he had developed when he was 7 and afraid of monsters in the closet. I heard yelling, he said quietly when I sat on the edge of his bed. I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry. Daddy and I were having a serious discussion. Grown-up stuff. Are you getting divorced? I took a breath. How would you feel about that? He was quiet for a long moment, his small face serious in the flashlight's glow. Then, Dad never believes me when I tell him things. He always says I'm making it up or being dramatic. He says that to you too. I've heard him. I see how you get smaller when he says it. My heart cracked open. This child, this perceptive, resilient child, had been watching and understanding far more than I had realized. You're very observant, I managed. Will I still have to go to Grandma Judith's house? No, baby. Never again if you don't want to. He nodded slowly, processing this information with the gravity it deserved. Then he put down his book and hugged me, hard, burying his face against my shoulder the way he hadn't done since he was much smaller. I love you, Mom. I love you too, Oliver. More than anything in this world. More than my own comfort or my marriage or anything else. You are my priority. You always have been. I'm sorry it took me so long to show you. The following week brought developments I hadn't anticipated. Vanessa's assault charge had become local news. Someone at the police station, I never learned who, had leaked the story to a reporter at the Meadowbrook Gazette. The headline wasn't sensational, but it didn't need to be. Local charity leader cited for assault of minor at family gathering. The article included Vanessa's arrest photo, her expression a mixture of outrage and disbelief that this could possibly be happening to her. The fallout was swift. Vanessa's position on the Junior League Charity Committee became temporarily suspended pending resolution of personal matters, a polite fiction for the board's hasty distancing from scandal. Richard's application for a seat on the City Planning Commission, which he had been cultivating for over a year, was quietly withdrawn at the suggestion of the current members. Judith canceled her monthly book club indefinitely, unable to face the whispered conversations that would inevitably occur. But the truly unexpected development came from an unlikely source, Paul, Vanessa's husband. He showed up at my office on a Tuesday afternoon, looking like a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. My assistant Maya raised an eyebrow when she announced him, clearly expecting me to refuse the meeting. After a moment's consideration, I waved him in. Mrs. Castellano. He stood awkwardly in front of my desk, his expensive suit rumpled, his tie loosened. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now. You're not far from it. Sit down, Paul. He sat, lowering himself into the chair like a man afraid it might collapse beneath him. His hands trembled slightly as he placed them on his knees, and I noticed he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. I came to apologize. Not for Vanessa, that's not my apology to give. For myself. For calling Derek and suggesting he get you under control, like you were some kind of misbehaving employee rather than a mother protecting her child. For standing by while my wife did what she did. For not seeing what should have been obvious. Why the change of heart? He laughed bitterly, the sound scraping against the professional quiet of my office. Sandra Delgado came to our house. Asked a lot of questions I didn't have good answers for. About Vanessa's behavior. About how she disciplines our children. About whether we had ever witnessed her being physical with other kids, including Oliver. I waited, keeping my expression neutral. My daughter Emma is 7. She told Sandra, in private, that mommy hits when she's angry. That mommy pulled her ear once for talking back at the dinner table. That mommy called her stupid when she spilled juice on the carpet. That she's scared of making mommy mad. His voice broke on the last word, and he had to pause to collect himself. I didn't know. I swear to you, Nina, I didn't know. I work 60 hours a week at the firm. I'm never home. I travel constantly. I thought everything was fine. I thought we had a perfect family. Everything is never fine when people are afraid to tell the truth. No. He wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. It's not. I'm filing for divorce. I've already retained an attorney, not from the family, someone independent. I'm seeking full custody of Emma and Tyler. And I wanted you to know that I'll testify if you need me to. About Vanessa's temper. About the family's attitude toward physical discipline. About the culture they've created where children are expected to endure and adults are never held accountable. All of it. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. Paul had always struck me as a peripheral figure at Holloway family gatherings, quiet, accommodating, slightly bewildered by the dynamics he'd married into. I had assumed he was complicit. I had never considered that he might simply be oblivious, lost in the fog of his own demanding career and trusting his wife to manage the home front. Why tell me this? Because you did what I should have done years ago. You put your child first, consequences be damned. You didn't care about the family reputation or the social fallout or what anyone would think. You saw your son hurt and you acted. He stood, extending his hand across my desk. You opened my eyes. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for how long they were closed. I shook his hand. Take care of your children, Paul. That's all the thanks I need. After he left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, watching the afternoon light shift across my desk and thinking about the ripples that spread from a single stone dropped in still water. 2 marriages destroyed. 2 households upended. But also, 2 children finally protected. 2 fathers forced to confront their failures. The scales weren't balanced, not by a long shot. But they were tipping in the right direction. Update 2, 3 months later, the divorce was finalized on a gray November morning, the kind of day where the sky seems to press down with physical weight. Derek signed the papers without contest. His family's attorneys had advised him, in no uncertain terms, that fighting me would only prolong the scandal and potentially expose additional unflattering details. The documentation I had compiled, combined with Oliver's testimony and the CPS investigation findings, painted a picture no judge would view favorably. Better to accept reasonable terms than risk losing everything in a public battle. Joint custody, with me as primary residential parent. Oliver would spend 2 weekends a month with Derek, with a schedule never coinciding with Holloway. Family gatherings. No unsupervised contact with Vanessa, Patricia, Judith, or Richard, a provision I had insisted on and Derek had, after considerable resistance, accepted. A custody agreement with teeth, enforceable by court order. Derek moved into an apartment across town, a sterile 2-bedroom in a complex with amenities he would never use. The first weekend Oliver spent there, my son came home quiet and thoughtful. Dad seems different, he said, dropping his backpack by the door. Quieter. He asked me about school, actually asked and then listened to what I said instead of checking his phone. He made me pancakes. He's never made me pancakes before. That's good, sweetheart. Is it weird that I kind of miss the old house? Not the family stuff. Just the house itself. My room there was bigger. It's not weird at all. It's completely normal to miss familiar places, even when leaving them was the right choice. He considered this with the gravity of a philosopher twice his age. I think I'm glad we left. The house felt heavy. Like everyone was always watching and waiting for someone to mess up so they could be disappointed. Out of the mouths of babes. Vanessa's assault case resolved in a plea bargain after weeks of legal maneuvering. She accepted responsibility for simple assault, a lesser charge, in exchange for avoiding trial. The sentence, 200 hours of community service, mandatory anger management classes for 6 months, and a formal apology delivered through her attorney to Oliver. The apology arrived in an envelope with the law firm's letterhead. It was 3 paragraphs of carefully crafted language that admitted wrongdoing without admitting fault, expressed regret without accepting responsibility, and offered reconciliation without meaningful change. I read it once, showed it to Monica, and filed it away. I didn't care about words. I cared about consequences. Her divorce from Paul was messier, as I had expected. Vanessa fought for primary custody of Emma and Tyler with the ferocity of someone who still believed rules didn't apply to her. She hired the most expensive attorneys her family's money could buy. She attempted to paint Paul as an absent father, uninvolved and ignorant of his children's needs. But the CPS investigation had uncovered too much. Emma's testimony, delivered to a child psychologist in a safe environment, was damning. Tyler, only 4, had demonstrated behavioral patterns consistent with fear of his mother. And I provided my documentation, all 18 months of it, which established a pattern of behavior that extended well beyond Vanessa's own household. The judge awarded Paul primary residential custody, with Vanessa receiving supervised visitation pending successful completion of her anger management program and parenting classes. I heard through the grapevine, Monica had contacts everywhere, that Vanessa was appealing the decision. I suspected she would continue fighting for years, unable to accept that her actions had consequences. Some people never learn. But their children don't have to suffer while they refuse. Patricia, the matriarch who had smirked at my son's pain, had largely disappeared from public view. Judith told Derek, who told me through our attorneys during custody discussions, that Patricia had moved to Florida to stay with her daughter from a previous marriage. She had claimed the Meadowbrook winters were becoming too difficult for her health, but everyone understood the real reason. Good riddance. Richard and Judith maintained their social standing through sheer force of will and decades of accumulated goodwill, but the cracks were showing. Their holiday party, usually the social event of the season with a guest list that required careful curation, was notably subdued that year. Several longtime friends had quietly distanced themselves, their Christmas cards notably absent from the mantelpiece. The Holloway name, once synonymous with civic responsibility and charitable generosity, now carried a whiff of scandal that would take years to dissipate. Derek was making progress. His therapist, court suggested as part of our custody agreement, though he claimed he would have sought help anyway, was apparently helping him examine the family dynamics he had grown up in and unconsciously perpetuated. I wasn't ready to trust him, might never fully trust him again, but I could acknowledge growth when I saw it. The man who had told our son not to make a big deal of being hurt was, slowly, learning to listen. And me? I moved us to a smaller house closer to Oliver's school, a craftsman bungalow with a yard just big enough for a garden and a swing set. My job at the architectural firm continued, my bosses had been understanding about the personal turmoil, and my work hadn't suffered despite the chaos of my personal life. If anything, the clarity I had gained about my own boundaries had improved my professional confidence. I spoke up more in meetings. I advocated for my designs. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. Monica had become a genuine friend, not just an attorney. We had lunch once a month at a small cafe downtown, where we celebrated the small victories and strategized about the remaining battles. She had guided me through the darkest period of my life with expertise and compassion, and I would be grateful forever. But the biggest change was internal. For 12 years, I had contorted myself to fit the Holloway family mold. I had bitten my tongue when Judith criticized my cooking, my housekeeping, my parenting, my career choices. I had lowered my expectations and taught myself to ignore the small cruelties that accumulated like sediment at the bottom of a river. I had believed, truly believed, that keeping the peace was worth the cost. That Oliver would be fine if I just managed the situation carefully enough. That love required sacrifice, even when the sacrifice was my own dignity. I was wrong. The morning after the divorce was finalized, I woke up early and made breakfast for Oliver: scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, fresh squeezed juice. We ate together at our small kitchen table, sunlight streaming through windows I had chosen myself, in a house where no one would ever make my son feel unwelcome. "Mom?" Oliver said between bites. "Yeah? Thank you." "For what, sweetheart?" He shrugged, suddenly shy. "For being on my side. For believing me when I finally told you things. For not making me go back there and pretend everything was okay." I reached across the table and took his hand, marveling at how much he had grown in just a few months, not physically, but in confidence, in willingness to speak his truth. "I will always be on your side, Oliver. Always. Even when it's hard. Even when other people don't understand. You are my priority. Never forget that." He nodded, then returned to his eggs with a single-minded focus only a 10-year-old can muster. I watched him eat, my heart full and aching simultaneously. There would be more challenges ahead, continued therapy for both of us, navigating co-parenting with a man I no longer trusted completely, explaining to Oliver as he grew older the full scope of what had happened and why. None of it would be easy. Healing never is. But for the first time in years, I felt capable. I felt strong. I felt like myself, not the diminished version I had become, but the woman I had been before I learned to make myself small for people who would never appreciate the sacrifice. The final piece of closure came unexpectedly, 2 weeks after Christmas. I was sorting through a box of items retrieved from the old house, things Derek had sent over, mostly Oliver's belongings that had been left behind in the rush of moving. Near the bottom, tucked between old birthday cards and a stuffed elephant from Oliver's toddler years, I found an envelope addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery, covered in careful, elderly script. Dear Nina, this letter will likely never reach you, as I am too ashamed to send it. But I need to write it nonetheless. My therapist says that's important, writing things down even if no one reads them. My name is Patricia Holloway, though you know me as the woman who smirked at your son's pain. The woman who said he deserved what happened to him. The woman who has spent 83 years on this earth and somehow learned nothing about kindness. I have spent the past 3 months in Florida, far from the life I built in Meadowbrook and the family I helped shape into something I can no longer defend. My daughter Evelyn, from my first marriage, has insisted I see a therapist. At my age, I resisted initially. What could some young person with degrees possibly tell me that I don't already know? But I was wrong about that, as I have been wrong about so many things. I want you to know this, Nina, I was wrong. Not just on that Sunday evening, though that was the worst of it, the moment when everything I had become crystallized into one unforgivable act. I was wrong in 100 small ways over the years. In the comments I made about your background, suggesting you weren't good enough for the Holloway name. In my remarks about your career, as if a woman with ambition was somehow deficient. In the way I treated Oliver as an annoyance rather than a child deserving of love and protection. I was wrong about all of it. I grew up in a home where children were disciplined harshly and expected to endure silently. We learned early that showing pain was weakness, that questioning authority was rebellion, that family reputation mattered more than individual suffering. I raised my children the same way. I watched my grandchildren raise their children the same way. I thought I was teaching strength and resilience. I see now that I was only teaching fear. Your son's face haunts me. Not because of the consequences I faced, though losing my place in Meadowbrook society stings more than I expected. His face haunts me because I saw myself clearly in that moment. I saw what I had become, a bitter old woman who found satisfaction in a child's pain because it confirmed her worldview about discipline and respect. I was ashamed of that woman. I am still ashamed of her. I do not expect your forgiveness. I am not even certain I deserve it. My therapist says forgiveness is a process, not a destination, and that I should focus on my own accountability rather than seeking absolution from those I've harmed. But I want you to know that your courage on that night changed something in me. You chose your child over comfort. You chose truth over harmony. You chose to act when everyone else chose to be silent. You showed me what real strength looks like, not the cold, brittle thing I had mistaken for strength all my life, but something warm and fierce and protective. I hope Oliver heals from what we did to him. I hope you find peace in your new life. I hope that someday, the name Holloway might mean something other than harm. With regret, Patricia. I read the letter 3 times, my emotions cycling through anger, skepticism, reluctant acknowledgement, and finally something approaching understanding. Did I forgive Patricia? No. Not really. Forgiveness isn't a switch that flips based on the eloquence of an apology, no matter how seemingly genuine. What she did to my son, what she represented about that family's values, those wounds would take years to heal, if they ever fully did. But I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my journal. Not as absolution, not as closure, but as evidence. Evidence that change is possible, even for those who seem most resistant to it. Evidence that even hearts hardened by decades of cruelty can crack open when confronted with undeniable truth. Evidence that standing up for what's right can ripple outward in ways you never anticipate and never fully see. That evening, I called Monica. I got a letter from Patricia. The smirking grandmother from the incident? Monica sounded surprised. What did she want? To apologize. For real, I think. Or as real as someone like her can manage. She's in therapy now, apparently. How do you feel about that? I considered the question, watching the winter sunset paint the sky outside my kitchen window in shades of rose and gold. I feel like I don't owe her anything. Not forgiveness, not acknowledgement, not even a response. But I also feel something unexpected. Not hopeful, exactly. Just aware that people are more complicated than the worst thing they've done. That change is possible even when it seems impossible. That's remarkably generous of you. It's not generosity, I said slowly, working through my own thoughts as I spoke. It's exhaustion. I'm tired of carrying anger, Monica. It's heavy. It takes up space I'd rather fill with something else. I'd rather put that energy into building a new life than into maintaining resentment about the old one. And what does that new life look like? I glanced around my small kitchen, at the drawings Oliver had taped to the refrigerator, depicting our new house with bright colors and a sun that looked like a yellow spider, at the potted herbs growing on the windowsill, basil and rosemary and thyme, at the calendar on the wall marked with Oliver's soccer practices and my work deadlines and lunch dates with friends I had reconnected with after years of Holloway-centric isolation. It looks quiet, I said finally. It looks safe. It looks like exactly what my son and I deserve. Spring came early that year, eager and insistent after a mild winter. By early March, crocuses were pushing through the last patches of frost, and the trees along our street were hazed with the pale green of emerging buds. Oliver had joined a soccer team at his new school, something he had wanted to do for years, but weekend practices had always conflicted with mandatory Holloway family gatherings. Now, every Saturday morning, I stood on the sidelines with other parents, watching my son run and laugh and play with kids who knew him only as Oliver, the funny kid who was good at defense and told terrible jokes during water breaks. He had made friends. Real friends, not the carefully vetted children of his grandmother's social circle, but kids he had chosen himself. They came to our house for pizza and movies. They built elaborate forts in the backyard from cardboard boxes and old sheets. They were loud and messy and delightfully ordinary. Derek came to some of the games. We stood on opposite sides of the field, exchanging polite nods when our eyes met, co-parenting in parallel rather than in partnership. He continued with therapy, according to Oliver, and seemed to be doing genuine work on himself. I wasn't ready to trust him again, might never be entirely ready, but I could acknowledge growth when I saw it. One Saturday, after a particularly triumphant game where Oliver scored the winning goal, we celebrated with ice cream at a shop downtown. He chose chocolate with rainbow sprinkles, I ordered salted caramel. We sat on a bench outside, watching people walk by in the warm afternoon light, and he leaned his head against my shoulder like he used to when he was small. Mom? Yeah, sweetheart? Do you think Dad will ever really understand what he did wrong? Like, really understand, not just say the right things because his therapist told him to? The question caught me off guard. I took my time answering, wanting to get it right. I think Dad is trying to understand. Whether he ever gets there completely, all the way down to his bones. I honestly don't know. Some people see their mistakes clearly and let that clarity change them. Other people only see part of the picture, and that's as far as they can go. But here's what matters, Oliver, you don't have to wait for anyone else to understand in order to move forward with your life. Your feelings are valid whether he acknowledges them or not. Your experience happened whether he believes it or not. Your right to be safe, to be respected, to be believed, those aren't conditional on anyone else's understanding. He processed this, licking his ice cream thoughtfully. A drop fell onto his soccer jersey and he dabbed at it with his napkin, unconcerned. I think I'm going to be okay, he said finally. Like, not right away. Some days I still feel weird about everything. But eventually, I think I'm going to be okay. I know you are, sweetheart. Because you taught me something important. When everyone was just sitting there doing nothing, pretending nothing bad had happened, you did something. You showed me that you don't have to accept things the way they are just because that's how they've always been. You can change them. Even if it's scary. Even if people get mad at you. Even if everyone thinks you're making too big a deal out of it. I blinked back tears, overwhelmed by pride in this small, brave person I had helped create. That's exactly right, baby. And Mom? He looked up at me with those earnest brown eyes, so much older and wiser than his years. When I grow up, I'm going to be that kind of person too. The kind who does something instead of just sitting there watching. I want to be like you. I pulled him close, ice cream forgotten, and held him tight enough to anchor us both to this moment. This imperfect, beautiful, hard-won moment. This spring afternoon on a bench outside an ice cream shop, with my son's chocolate-smeared face pressed against my shoulder and the rest of our lives spreading out before us like a garden waiting to bloom. You already are, sweetheart, I whispered into his hair. You already are. Looking back, I can trace the turning point to a single moment, the crack of palm against cheek in a dining room where I had never felt welcome. Everything changed because I refused to let that moment pass unmarked. I refused to smooth it over, to minimize it, to sacrifice my son's safety on the altar of family harmony. I refused to be the woman they expected me to be, compliant, quiet, grateful for my place at their table. I chose differently. And that choice created ripples I'm still watching spread. My name is Nina Castellano. I am a mother, an architect, a woman who spent 12 years making herself smaller for people who would never appreciate the sacrifice. I am imperfect. I am sometimes still angry. I am frequently exhausted by the work of rebuilding a life from the wreckage of the one I left behind. But I am no longer silent. And my son knows, in his bones, that he has at least one person in this world who will always, always choose him. That's the only legacy that matters. For anyone reading this who recognizes something of their own story in mine, you are not crazy. You are not overreacting. You are not obligated to accept mistreatment simply because it comes from people who share your blood or your name. The people who demand your silence about their behavior are telling you exactly who they are. Believe them. And when you're ready, only when you're ready, because you are the only one who can know when that moment comes, know that there is life on the other side. It's smaller, maybe. Quieter. But it's infinitely more peaceful. It's waiting for you whenever you're brave enough to reach for it. A final thought. In a world that often rewards silence and punishes those who speak uncomfortable truths, choosing to protect the vulnerable, even at great personal cost, remains among the most profound acts of love any of us can offer. The people who stand up, who refuse to look away, who dial the number and file the report and endure the fallout with their heads held high. They remind us that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is the decision that someone else's safety matters more than our own comfort. If this story has stirred something in you, let it be this simple truth: your voice has power. Your refusal to accept cruelty has ripple effects you may never fully see. And somewhere, right now, a child who feels alone in a room full of people who should protect them is waiting, just waiting, for one person brave enough to stand up and say, "This ends now." Be that person. The world needs you.